Look, old man, are you going to get this done? Or do I need to get someone who knows what they're doing? The voice was a blade, sharp and cutting through the humid air of the motor pool. It was a young voice, full of the kind of arrogance that came from a life lived without consequence, a life where every door had been held open. He was a new recruit, no older than 20, but his uniform was so crisp it looked like it could cut glass, his posture so perfect it was a caricature of military discipline. His name was Officer Miller, and he was the epitome of the new guard, a man who saw the world in clean lines and regulations, with no room for the faded, the worn, or the old. He stood with his hands on his hips, a smirk playing on his lips as he watched the old man. The old man, John, moved with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a glacier's crawl. His back was stooped, a permanent curve etched by decades of hard living and even harder work. He was a contractor, brought in to perform some specialized maintenance on a piece of heavy equipment. His hands, gnarled and thick with calluses, moved with a practiced, almost surgical precision as he worked on a complex hydraulic system. His work was a silent ballet, a dance of rust and steel that was invisible to the uninitiated, invisible to Miller. Miller saw only the slowness. He saw the faded camouflage trousers that were a relic of a different era, the scuffed work boots that had seen more miles than a Greyhound bus, and the thin, cotton shirt that was soaked through with sweat. But most of all, he saw the tattoo. It was a small, faded mark on the old man's forearm, a simple design of a trident with a single lightning bolt running through it. The ink was a pale, almost indistinct blue, like a watercolor left in the sun for too long. It was the mark of a forgotten time, a mark that Miller saw as a sign of weakness. A bit out of your depth, aren't you, old-timer? Miller's voice dripped with condescension. That thing on your arm, what is that? Some kind of faded tribal tattoo. Looks like a kid did it with a ballpoint pen. We've got standards now, you know. We don't just let anyone wander around with a wrench and a questionable past. We've got regulations for this kind of thing. He gestured vaguely at the old man's arm, his face a mask of patronizing pity. John didn't look up. His hands, still and steady, continued to work, a silent rebuttal to the young man's words. His silence was a wall, a barrier of dignity that Miller could not breach. His stoicism was a quiet rebuke, a force more powerful than any shouted argument. It was a silence born of a life of action, a life where words were secondary to deeds. His quiet patience was an insult to the young officer's frantic, emotional turmoil. Miller's face tightened. The old man's disregard was a personal affront to his authority, a direct challenge to the rules he held so dear. His arrogance was as polished as the chrome finish on the young officer's regulation-issue sidearm. He was a man who lived by the book, and the old man, with his quiet dignity and faded ink, was a rogue variable in his perfectly ordered universe. "I'm going to have to ask you to stop what you're doing, sir," Miller said, his voice now tight with forced politeness. "I'm revoking your access to this area. Your work is too slow, and your appearance is not in compliance with regulations. We have a zero-tolerance policy for loitering, and frankly, I don't think you're physically capable of completing this task in a timely manner. I'm going to need you to pack up your tools and leave the premises now." A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the sound of Miller's raised voice. They were mostly young recruits, fresh out of basic training, their uniforms pristine, their faces full of youthful judgment. They watched with a mixture of amusement and disdain, their laughter a low hum in the background. They were all members of Miller's tribe, the New Guard, and they saw the old man as he did, a relic, a ghost from a past they had only read about in history books. John finally stopped his work. He slowly pulled his hand back, and in his hand he held a small, intricate piece of metal. It was a hydraulic bearing, no bigger than a quarter, but its surface was etched with a tiny, almost invisible symbol, a trident, just like the one on his arm. As his fingers traced the faint lines, a brief, sharp memory flashed behind his eyes. He was not here, not in the sweltering motor pool. He was in a different world, a world of jungle green and bone-deep mud, where the only sound was the thrum of a helicopter and the constant nagging whisper of his own fear. His fingers remembered the feel of a cold steel rifle, and his mind, for a brief, fleeting moment, was filled with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smell of gunpowder. He was a young man again, his body a well-oiled machine, his mind a steel trap. The memory was gone as quickly as it had come, leaving him with the lingering taste of a life lived on the razor's edge. Miller saw none of this. He saw only the old man's hesitation, a moment of weakness that he seized upon like a hawk. "You heard me. Put it down. That's military property. You don't get to just take parts with you." Miller's face was red now, his voice a low growl of frustration. "I'm going to have to call security. You're trespassing. This is going to get a lot worse for you if you don't comply." John gently placed the bearing back into the machine. He looked up, his eyes meeting Miller's for the first time. There was no anger there, no fear, only a deep, abiding stillness, a quiet well of patience that had been forged in the crucible of a lifetime of pain and sacrifice. "It's a 2.2 millimeter hydraulic bearing, son. It's been seized. The seal is broken. The whole pump's gone. She's not going to fly with this one." His voice was a low, gravelly whisper, a sound that spoke of dust and years and the kind of quiet that only came from the deep places of the earth. Miller scoffed. "You don't know what you're talking about. The report says it's a minor leak. You're just trying to run up the bill. Get out of here before I have you arrested for destruction of military property." His rhetorical questions were a form of self-assertion, an attempt to re-establish his dominance in a situation that was slipping away from him. He had all the power, all the authority, and yet the old man, with his quiet dignity, was making him feel small. As the confrontation reached its peak, a lone figure stood on the periphery of the crowd, a middle-aged Marine with a face that was a road map of a life lived long and hard. He was a veteran of the desert wars, a man who understood the difference between a pristine uniform and a soul forged in the fires of conflict. He had been watching the scene unfold with growing unease. His eyes, trained to see the truth behind the illusion, were drawn to the old man's hand. He saw the way the man's fingers moved, a silent language of expertise that only another professional could understand. He saw the faint, faded mark on his arm. He saw the trident. But what caught his attention, what sent a jolt of recognition through his body, was the single lightning bolt that bisected the symbol. He had only ever seen that mark in one place, in the worn, leather-bound pages of an old history book, in the stories of a forgotten generation of warriors. The man's eyes widened, a dawning horror creeping into his expression. This wasn't just a veteran. This was a ghost, a legend. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed a number he had memorized long ago. "General," he said into the phone, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "Sir, I'm at the motor pool. There's a situation. You're not going to believe who's here." The narrative cross-cut to a different scene, a different office, a different man. The general, a man of power and authority, sat behind a large mahogany desk, his face a grim mask of exhaustion. The call came through, and his posture, for the first time all day, straightened. His eyes, tired and world-weary, came alive with a sudden, intense focus. He hung up the phone, a single word hanging in the air: mobilize. The call was a race against time, a desperate attempt to stop a catastrophe of judgment from unfolding. Back at the motor pool, Miller's voice had risen to a shout. "You're under arrest," he bellowed, his hand going to the handcuffs on his belt. The crowd of young recruits watched with a gleeful expectation, a bloodlust for a public humiliation. They were ready to see the old man brought to his knees, to see their own biases and prejudices validated by the formal authority of the military. But just as Miller's hand closed on the cold steel, a low, thrumming sound filled the air. It was the sound of a motorcade, a line of black SUVs, moving with silent, deadly purpose. They pulled up in a cloud of dust, and out of the lead vehicle stepped a man in a crisp uniform, a man whose rank was so high it was almost mythical. He was a 3-star general, and his face, carved from granite and shadowed by a lifetime of command, was set in a grim line. The crowd fell silent. The new recruits, so boisterous just moments ago, were now statues, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Miller, his hand still on his belt, was frozen in place. The general, his eyes scanning the crowd, ignored him completely. He walked past Miller as if the young officer were an insignificant part of the scenery, a piece of litter on the side of the road. His boots, polished to a mirror shine, crunched on the gravel as he made his way to the old man. The silence was a cathedral of anticipation, a holy space of impending reckoning. The general stopped in front of the old man. His back was ramrod straight, his posture a testament to decades of rigorous discipline. The old man, still and silent, returned the gaze. The general's hand rose, a slow, deliberate movement, and came to rest on his forehead in a sharp, crisp salute. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, reverent rumble that carried to every corner of the motor pool. "Master Chief John Miller, it's an honor to see you, sir. I apologize for the unprofessionalism of my men." The entire world seemed to stop. The name, John Miller, was a legend whispered in the halls of power, a myth spoken only in hushed tones. The young officer, his face a mask of shocked disbelief, took a staggered step back. This wasn't just an old man. This was a myth. The general, his salute still in place, began to speak. "Recruits, you see this man?" He gestured to John, his voice now a booming pronouncement that echoed off the steel walls of the motor pool. "This man is a legend. He is not just a veteran. He is one of the last of the original SEALs. In 1971, he was part of a 5-man team that was sent behind enemy lines to retrieve a downed pilot. Their mission was a one-way ticket, a suicide run. 3 of his men died within the first 12 hours. Master Chief Miller, alone and wounded, carried the pilot on his back for 6 miles through enemy territory. He fought off a full enemy patrol with only a knife. His extraction point was blown, so he commandeered an enemy patrol boat, a derelict piece of junk with a single engine, and navigated it downriver for 3 days, all while under constant fire. He delivered the pilot, alive and conscious, to a friendly checkpoint before collapsing from his wounds. "This," the general gestured to the faint tattoo on the old man's arm. "This is not a mistake. It is the mark of the first SEAL team, a team so legendary their records were classified for 50 years. It is the mark of a man who gave up everything to save another, a man who knows the true meaning of honor and sacrifice. The young officer Miller, now pale and shaking, looked at the old man's faded ink, a silent testament to a world he could not comprehend. His face, just moments ago a mask of arrogance, was now a portrait of shame. His actions, the general continued, his voice, softer now but no less powerful, are the reason the SEALs are what they are today. The training protocols you think you invented, the tactics you study in your classrooms, they were written in blood by this man, by his team. He turned his gaze, now a fiery, righteous judgment, to the young officer. And you, Officer Miller, you look at this man, this hero, this legend, and you see a slow, old man. You see faded ink and scuffed boots, and you dare to lecture him on regulations. You see a piece of military history, and you try to arrest it. You have no honor, no respect, and no comprehension of the very thing you claim to defend. You are a disgrace to that uniform, to this entire institution. His rebuke was a full-throated condemnation, a blistering torrent of words that stripped the young man of his pride, his authority, and his very identity. The old man, John, finally spoke again. His voice was a gentle counterpoint to the general's powerful condemnation. He was just doing his job, General. The rules are the rules. They're there for a reason. His words were a quiet, compassionate reprieve, a final, unlooked-for act of grace. He had been humiliated, insulted, and threatened, and yet he offered forgiveness, a profound moral lesson delivered in a single, quiet sentence. He, who had every right to demand retribution, chose to show mercy, a testament to the quiet strength of a man who had already seen enough punishment to last 100 lifetimes. He looked at the young man, at the tears now welling in his eyes, and offered a faint, almost imperceptible nod of understanding. The young man's humiliation was complete, but the old man's vindication was even more so, a quiet triumph of dignity over arrogance. The next day, Officer Miller was reassigned. He was not discharged, not stripped of his rank, but sent to a remote, desolate outpost, a place where the only thing that mattered was work, not status. The general, in a quiet, private meeting with John, had offered to have him fired, to have his career erased, but the old man had simply shaken his head. "He's young, sir. He'll learn. Give him a chance." The incident, however, was not forgotten. A new training program was instituted, a mandatory course on respect and history, named unofficially the Master Chief Protocol. It taught young recruits to look past the superficial, to see the man behind the uniform, the history in the faded ink. Months later, at a small, out-of-the-way grocery store, a chance encounter. A young man, his posture less rigid now, his uniform still crisp but without the former arrogance, stood in front of an old man, a familiar figure with a stooped back and a faded tattoo. The young man, Miller, looked at John, his eyes full of a quiet, profound respect. He simply nodded, a small, humble gesture of acknowledgement. The old man, John, returned the nod, a silent act of forgiveness, a silent promise of a better future. The true measure of a man's worth is not in the shine of his uniform, but in the quiet dignity of his soul, in the faded ink of a life lived for others.